ashamed about how many minutes of it I watched, but I also want to talk about it.
Okay, well, I don't believe in gender essentialism, but I do deeply believe that Reels are for boys and TikToks are for girls because I do not watch Reels. I only have them sent to me by men.
See, that's interesting. I agree. I downloaded TikTok like 2.5 years ago when I was working at a job where I had to like do like TikTok videos, man on the street
Mm.
stuff, etc. But I swore I would never download it because I knew I'd get addicted to it, which I then did. So then I deleted TikTok as soon as I didn't have to use it for work anymore. But I started using Reels, which were great then because they weren't great because the algorithm kind of sucked. So I
Mhm.
didn't get addicted, but now I'm as addicted to Reels as I was to TikTok 2 years ago.
You were doing man on the street interviews.
I was,
All right, roll tape. We're gonna need to see
no, it's
that.
it's so embarrassing, it's so bad. I the best performing one, I actually wasn't even in. I was just kind of standing
Well,
to
that's
the
a
side.
given.
Well, which okay, so this is, I was staying to the side, but we were, doing this thing where we would go up to kids or just people, in where else but Washington Square
You
Park.
were harassing children in the
We
park.
we were
I
harassing
understand.
children. Well, this time, it
Uh-huh.
was a Gen Z harassing fellow Gen Zs. I'm just, I'm like a millennial cusp. Anyways, she asked them, "What's your favorite photo on your phone?"
Mhm.
And this kid held up his phone, and it's a picture of the cover of Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, the movie. Um, but it just says balls. And that's what he said. He's like, "It's
Mm,
Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, but it just says balls."
just as
Um,
balls.
and it got like 1.4 million views within a week.
That's a Zoomer on Zoomer crime. I think the millennial equivalent of that is the Nickelback, like, look at this graph.
Mhm.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do. Well,
Yeah.
that's what he was doing, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I think though that it's like, I don't know. I was rereading earlier Ryan Broderick Garbage Day essay from a couple weeks ago called "The Age
Mm,
of Slop,"
mhm.
where he's talking about all this and how much slop there is and how to be conscientious about not consuming it as much, or not creating it as much. Let me read from it actually for a second. He says the fix for all this seems obvious and impossible. That it has to come from us, the user, the viewer, the consumer. And there's a lot of us now. We have to be the ones to demand that we all make less, aim smaller, be more deliberate about what we consume, and find new ways of funding and distributing what we do make. Uh, but he says too, if it's going to happen, it needs to happen soon because slop is only slop when you remember that what real food looks like. And the anxiety we're all feeling right now is that if our slop era lasts any longer, we won't remember what real food looks like anymore, which I feel like is kind of the thesis of why we started this podcast.
I see what you did there. Yeah, we'll be feeding you real food. Hope that's okay. Well, in my capacity as the CEO of a media company, um, I am doing everything that I can to combat the slop era. Um, I also have like called it filler.
Mhm.
Um,
You did write a great essay about this also a few weeks ago.
yes, I did. And my company's called Dirt, so what's the opposite of slop? Obviously dirt.
Dirt.
Yeah,
you know,
famously.
yeah, soil, dirt, soil. It's rich,
Mhm,
nutrients,
mhm.
minerals, etc. Yeah.
Have you been to the Earth Room?
I have been to the Earth Room, I think, like 3 or 4 times for, like, 60 to 120 seconds each time.
That's a lot of times, that's more than I've been.
3 times?
What were you doing in there?
I was, observing the dirt, really smelling the dirt. Actually, that's why I go there, is to smell the dirt.
Yeah, well, okay, so last time I was there, I felt like it wasn't as fragrant as it usually was, and I was wondering if they changed, like,
The
something about.
formula?
Yes. Taste. I actually thought maybe it was something more about the room, that it was less humid or something.
Mm.
Um,
Well, what time when was this summer?
yeah, it was like a month ago,
Is it air
maybe.
conditioned? It has to be air conditioned.
Well, that's the thing, then I was like, maybe last time I went, like, the air conditioning wasn't on and, like, the heat was on and it smelled different.
Mhm.
I think the last time I went was in the winter.
which is yeah, very
This
different
was
experience.
only my 2nd time.
Oh,
But
so
now
the
I'm
dirt wait,
like, I'm underperforming every time I'm in Soho. I should be like,
you should be
the
dirt
cartoon
maxing.
with like he's like smelling the pie and he's just like
Mhm.
floating.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
like you in the Earth room.
Being summoned to the Earth Room, which we should say to anybody listening who doesn't know what the Earth Room is, it's just like a room in Soho that would be like in New York, that would be like, I don't know, a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom apartment, but it
Mhm.
instead is like just at one big open room filled with like dirt, like that's like 2 or 3 feet high. Just a lot of dirt. Been there for 50 years. Um,
I think it's such a good I mean, I wasn't there on a date. Um,
mhm.
I can't tell you what was doing there. It'll be revealed. It'll be revealed at a future time. But I think it's like a great first date spot because it's like you take
Mhm.
somebody to Soho, you get coffee.
You think you're going
It
to Aritzia or something, I don't know, blue and green, naming stores. I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
know.
yeah. You think
Uniqlo.
you think you're going on a first date to
To
Aritzia, and
Uniqlo. I don't know what I'm talking about, sorry.
bougie.
Anyways.
No, you go to Soho, you're like, "Let's have a coffee," and then you're like, "Oh, can I show you something?" And then, with the utmost amount of riz, buzz into a random building and then walk up, 2 flights of stairs and are like, "Look, darling,
Mhm. Look
it's
at all
it's
I've
dirt.
gathered for you.
It's a room full of dirt, baby."
Yeah, I've been gathering this for 2 years preparing for this
Yeah.
date.
Nobody else knows about this.
Yeah. Um,
They let me in here because I have a certain amount of credit card points.
yeah, they let me yeah, the Resi, American Express,
Yeah.
dirt reservation
Shout
lounge,
out Ben
dirt
Ben
lounge.
Leventhal.
Mhm.
He's
Blackbird.
definitely listening.
Um, okay, I guess okay, we should talk about what this podcast is, basically, who we are. So
I mean, I guess.
I for a minute, and then we can dive
Okay.
back into the dirt.
Okay.
Actually, I will say very briefly, personal lore. I wrote my college admissions essay about dirt, about how it was because I grew up on a farm, right? So I wrote about how it was my we had a pile of dirt on the farm, many piles of dirt, but one 6-foot pile of dirt. And they wrote about how it was my favorite toy growing up. Um, and I got into 3 of the 10 colleges I applied for. So I don't know how effective it was, but here I am today. So I don't know. Personal lore for you.
All right, I was gonna have a sarcastic reaction, but that almost made me cry because I love that so much. I think that's so beautiful. And did you went to sort of an artsy school, right?
Yeah, I went, maybe unsurprisingly, having written about dirt, I did go to a 2,500 person liberal arts college in Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, liberal arts colleges in Portland are like, we got to get the dirt
Yeah,
boy.
we need the dirt boy.
Get him in here. Get him in here.
Um, but okay, so Tasteland is this
Yeah.
podcast. It's starting now, July. It'll be first episode out, July 31st, 2024.
Mhm.
Um, how did it happen? I write this newsletter, Creator Spotlight, for Beehive, where I write about newsletter creators from all kind of corners of the medium. People making money from it, people not making money from it, people using it as a creative vehicle, people making $1 million writing newsletters. And I do a podcast and I interview people. But sometimes I want to keep the thread going. Um, so that's where we come to this, which is a co-hosted podcast. So I think the way that we were connected was Beehive CEO Tyler. You guys had talked about doing a podcast before, but he being doing what he does was too busy for that. Ouch. But yeah, so he connected us.
Yeah, he connected us. We were set up on a blind podcast date. No, I think, yeah, we had one conversation. I think my concern was like Creator Spotlight is so well put together, obviously, and like makes sense. You're spending hours doing research or highlighting aspects of the newsletter business that aren't necessarily highlighted otherwise. And I was like, is this guy going to be serious? Too serious for moi?
Did you
And
think? No
mhm.
way.
Well, come on. So I saw a picture of you. It's like I wasn't like this guy grew up on a farm and
Yeah.
he's gonna be able to throw down. And then I got on the phone with you, and immediately I was like, oh, thank God, he's a hater.
My picture is also terrible. It's like I've got like my hair is much longer than it was now. I'm kind of like posed up. The picture it's not representative of who I am today.
We
Anyways,
could take a
hater
new one at the Earth
at the
Room.
Dirt Summit. Yes, yes.
Um, but yeah, no, I was and by hater, I just meant like when I say hater, I don't mean somebody who never makes anything and just points at other things and
Mhm.
criticizes them. I mean, like, are you willing to be the one to say, everyone else liked this movie and I didn't like
To
it
have an opinion.
for such and such a reason? Yeah. And
Mhm.
so when I got on the phone with you, I immediately was like, oh, he's like very real. Like, he's going to be able to, he's not going to have to participate in this weird, like, optimism maxing toxic
No.
positivity that really pervades a lot of um the tech podcast space for sure.
Mhm.
I mean, maybe not so much the culture podcast space, but like what we're really trying to do is something at the intersection of those two, where
Mhm.
we're trying to be more culturally literate, discriminating, better curated than maybe a typical tech
Yeah.
podcast. I don't want to say tech bro podcast, but I think
Well,
we know who we're
no
talking
offense
about
to any
here.
listeners.
Um, and but to have a little bit of a better understanding of the ins and outs of venture capital, the startup environment, how
Mhm.
businesses are funded, and the technology that distributes culture than the average culture podcast, which
Yeah.
understandably might have a pretty antagonistic relationship with stuff at the category level, like AI at the category level, crypto at the category level. So that's what we're setting out to do. And I will say, like, so my job is I'm the CEO of Dirt Media.
Mhm.
We are a startup and a media company. We're distributed primarily through newsletter, and we cover digital culture broadly. We have and are adding more subsidiary publications. We have one called Prune about design.
Mm.
I really feel like what I do editorially is also reflected in my Common App essay for college, where I wrote about um, my art practice in high school, which was I did a ton of paper cutting illustration, where I would do these like extremely intricate scenes all cut out of paper and glued together, like down to like, a candy shop where I would cut out every single individual piece of candy, and the pieces of candy would be so small. I was doing it with full size scissors too. The pieces of candy would be so small that I would have to be like balancing them on my fingernail before I would put them on the dot of glue. And there was an image in this essay about, I would find random cutouts in my carpet because I had a little bit of a shag carpet. So I was constantly doing this excavation where I would like find later like a tiny little heart or like a tiny little bone. And it was almost like an archaeological
Mhm.
dig. So, my company is called Dirt because culture right now, digging through the slop, digging through the filler, bringing this back home. It's like an archaeological dig. We're like
Yeah.
reaching into the shag carpet and being like, what of here is actually of value?
Mhm.
And the things that we highlight as a business, but also the things that we and you, like our listeners, are highlighting in aggregate, then become our taste.
Mhm.
And taste, as an idea, I argue, is the most powerful idea right now in culture and in business because of the rapid shifts that we're seeing in creation and distribution right now. And I think it is highly correlated with curation, but
Mhm. Well, wait, so you use the word or the phrase "taste economy" a lot.
yeah, yeah.
Define that.
Yeah, so like my thesis of the taste economy is essentially when you talk about businesses, you talk about moats, which is like
Mhm.
your moat is the thing that prevents another company from coming and putting you out of
The
business
thing they don't
immediately.
have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, think about McDonald's and Burger King. Obviously, these things are constantly changing, but like when McDonald's is like, we're going to have the Travis Scott meal, that means Burger King can't have the Travis Scott
Yeah,
meal.
Burger King Cactus Jack is hard to imagine.
Yeah, and obviously, like, the moats go way back, right? It's like a huge history. It's like, do you see the golden arches and think about your childhood? I mean, these things are very for companies as big as that, like, you kinda know what your moat is, and it's impossible to separate out from nostalgia, history, American culture, memetics, whatever,
Yeah.
which we'll get into all of that. But with a startup, it's like you're kind of defining it in real time, right? You have
Mhm.
no history, you have no name recognition. Um,
Well, that's like
you,
your whole thing at the start, is you're trying to build a moat. Like,
yes,
that's you're desperately
exactly.
trying to build a moat as soon as possible.
Yeah, and I'm sort of arguing like when the cost of creation goes to zero, or what
Mhm.
feels like zero, or what is perceived as zero, because things can be automated through AI, whether it's the creation of software, which, look, if people aren't touching it, it's going to be pretty mediocre, but it might be
Yeah.
passable for certain tasks, or a blog post, or an art graphic. Where does the value actually accrue? And if you are a business right now, you kind of have, there's like three possible modes, right? You can have proprietary technology, something nobody else has access to. So, we made Ozempic in a lab, and there's no generic, right? I
Yeah.
mean, there is a generic now, but like pre-generic, right? Oh wow, like that's, we created the most valuable company in Europe. Or like, we're like toggling with LVMH for the most valuable company in Europe
It was it?
because
I actually didn't know that.
I think so. Yeah,
That's
I could
crazy.
be wrong.
Yeah.
We'll
Well,
we'll
it was up there.
fact check that.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, like proprietary technology. Obviously, nobody else has the technology. Nobody
Mhm.
else can make what I make. That's my moat. Or supply chain innovation, or infrastructure access, where it's like, well, I have a salt mine. You don't have a salt mine. I have this many NVIDIA chips. You do
Yeah.
not. So that's my moat. You do not have access to the raw materials. You don't have access to the factory. You can't drop ship what I drop ship. So you don't have the moat. Fine.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's two. Anything outside that, I think it really comes down to taste. And some people would call it brand, storytelling, whatever you want to call it. I think it really is, that's where the culture piece comes in,
Mhm.
right? Like, if I have a salt mine, my website can be a landing page. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter. Berkshire Hathaway, I think, is like the company everyone cites, where it's like the
Yeah.
the landing page is like GeoCities, whatever. Um, Everyone else, like, it doesn't matter if you're selling seltzer or you're selling payroll software.
Mhm.
Like, you got to be out there, shilling your taste, telling the best story, like getting in people's heads, um, acting like a marketer,
Yeah.
understanding the humanities. Really, go read your James Joyce,
Yeah.
because you have nothing else that somebody else can't replicate, really, until you do like user capture, right? Like, because you can do a lock-in, right?
Mhm.
Like, there are certain types of enterprise software, like the stuff that hospitals use, where it's like every doctor's using this, they can't switch. So that's another mode,
Yeah.
essentially. But that's not available to a startup, right? Because you're finding your user and building your community in real time. That community becomes the moat eventually, but the way that you attract them is through your taste.
Yeah.
Or
Well,
some
wait,
people would say
what
curation.
one thing I wanna talk about in this. So, I'm thinking, like, this reminds me of a few weeks ago, there was this, like, kinda tweet pile-on thing. I think somebody, I think it was, like, Willie Staley had tweeted,
Oh,
uh
classic Willie
yeah,
Staley. Oh,
that's like Willie.
Willie Staley involved in a Twitter pylon.
Yeah,
Who
who
could
would've
have
guessed?
thought?
But
Yeah.
he tweeted, it was the Yellowbird hot sauce, and he's like, "They did Graza to everything looks like Graza now, like, this is Graza's fault, et
Uh,
cetera." And then people who, like, were more in, like, the consumer packaged goods industry start, like, replying, it's like, "Actually, it's the same agency who did the branding," and, like, people are like, "Actually," or, like, "Graza wasn't the first person to do squeezy balls," whatever. But what was interesting was, like, that it was the agency, and, like, that this agency has also done the branding for a bunch of other, like, CPG brands. And then I also
mm.
think of something like last decade, the equivalent of this was Gin Lane, the agency Gin Lane, which is now Pattern Brands, and they did the branding for like
Emmett.
Away.
We should
Yeah,
have
Emmett
him
Shine.
on.
We should.
You
But
know
like
Emmett too.
I've never no, but
Okay.
I know of his work.
Okay.
But anyways, they did all these the branding for all these startup, like CPG startup brands like Away,
Mhm.
Warby Parker, Sweet Green, whatever. And then like so the reason I'm talking about this is like there is a moat at first where like this agency has this aesthetic and gives it to a brand. But then I wonder is like, does the agency then kind of degrade their own moat over time, over like a decade or whatever, by giving all these different brands, you know, a similar aesthetic, like, there's
Mhm.
something similar. So, like, I don't know, do you think that, like, that agency branding moat degrades over time for, like, I don't know, the agency who did Graza or for, like, a Jin Lane?
Well, I think there's a distinction, right? Because like, they don't care once you've been paid your project fee, they don't care if you succeed or
Yeah.
fail as a startup, really.
But
So,
which
like,
also, though, I know, sorry, the last thing I'll say, Jin Lane, I think they got equity in a lot of the businesses they helped with.
okay, so that's good because you have skin in the game, but
Mhm.
you can't be totally invested in like, when you work with that many startups, you can't be, like, totally
Yeah,
invested in
no.
making sure that they don't
It's
all
not like you have
start to
20% equity.
converge on a certain, like, millennial aesthetic or, like, that sort of hipster Helvetica moment. Like, you wanna do the best job that you could do, but honestly, like, a certain type of startup founder is gonna want something that looks familiar. They might be even asking and bringing a mood board of their competitors saying, like, "I want this, but better." So, yes, they have skin in the game, but I think you don't for the startups, certainly, they need to be concerned that their brand and storytelling is not distinct enough.
Yeah.
For the agency, that's less of a consideration, I think, than not evolving quickly enough.
Mhm.
Like, to be an agency, the aesthetic that you have used and pioneered, even if you were the first one to come up with it, if it becomes stale, you can't sit there and be like, well, we were the ones to come up with this. Like, you have to evolve.
Yeah.
And I think a good example of that is like, if you think about Brat as branding,
Yeah. Was
Brat
it
did,
Special Offer? I think the agency that did
yeah,
this?
Brat did what Brat was supposed to do, what Brat needed to do. Whatever this agency or Charlie or the team or the stakeholders along the line of the branding of this artist comes up with next cannot be Brat.
Yeah.
And people who, any artist is looking at this and is like going to their agency and saying, like, do Brat, but for me, like, mistake.
Failure to
Right?
understand what
Yeah,
branding is
like,
about.
I mean, the first 5 people might get away with it. The 6th person, no, because now it's part of the slop. It's so
Mhm.
easy to tune out. And so, I think this is where the world of advertising really resembles the fine art world, where it's like you could go to a museum and point to a Picasso or a Rauschenberg. We just
Mhm.
wrote an interesting article about Rauschenberg and say, like, I could do that or my kid could do that. And it's like, but you didn't.
Yeah.
If you were the 100th person to do it, yeah, it's not that impressive.
Yeah.
Your kid could have made the Brat graphic.
Your kid could make the dirt room
Your kid could, yes, your kid could absolutely
temporarily.
make the Earth room. Yeah. Yeah, give that child a Zin and they're locked. I'm so sorry. I have like this is not mine. Um
Okay.
but yeah, like your child could do that, but they
Yeah.
didn't. And you could do that, but you didn't. And you don't want to be the 10th person. You want to be the first.
Mhm.
Um, so I think part of the issue with slop or even with AI as a creator is like, are we going to see a failure to innovate?
Yeah.
And that failure to innovate is a built-in advantage for the human tastemaker because I think the human tastemaker and critic
Mhm.
um, sees innovation and evolution as a virtue, a benefit, a skill set to cultivate, where you kind of have to always be like burning down the last thing you did, even if
Yeah.
you're not literally like it's still on your website, you're still proud of it, it's part of your portfolio, but
You have
what's
to forget it,
next?
which is kind of a
Yeah.
torturous existence, honestly. Like, I don't know, that's something I feel like I find hard is, like, something with Creator Spotlight, like, my mantra I try to take with it is, like, consistent but not predictable. Because like, every week,
Yeah.
right, I have to, like, interview a new person and write, like, a 1,500 word essay about who they are and why they're interesting and, like, justify justify the person's reading it, like, that they spent their time well. Um, which
Well, I think,
honestly go
yeah,
ahead.
sorry. Well, to bring it back to the startup environment, like it's pretty challenging because startups want to have a large total addressable market, which
Yeah.
means from a consumer perspective, you're seeking the median. But when you're
Mhm.
starting out, you need to be an outlier. So you can't be seeking the median in kind of the taste that you're presenting or the innovation that you're presenting. But
Mhm.
eventually, you have to appeal to a broad enough people or a small group of people who are going to pay a premium to use your product. And so you constantly have to balance um, kind of the general interest with whatever the special sauce is.
Yeah.
And if it's so new or so innovative that it's a turnoff, then you might have a problem
Mhm. Well, I think so.
because you're in a race against time. Like,
Yeah.
can you get the median adjusted to your outlier presentation, your outlier product before you run out of money?
Yeah. Well, it's like I mean, to use like the metaphor of like, a culture in like biology class, and you
Mhm,
you like put the thing in the petri dish and it grows, right? Like
mhm,
I think with taste and like what you're saying there, like you want to have a really opinionated perspective that like is inherently going to be small because
mhm,
it has to be small to be opinionated, to like have a compelling new fresh opinion. But then like your goal like you're saying is like to then like whatever the people are who resonate with that opinion, who find it compelling, who find it new, who find it fresh, you're trying to like make more people find that fresh. But it's like the conditions have to be right, right? Like in the petri dish, it has to be like the right humidity, the right, I don't know, whatever gel they put in those.
I mean, the
Um,
right business tried 2 years too early is, like, not gonna work. I mean,
yeah.
I have very complicated feelings about Uber and Airbnb, but, like, those are I mean, like, one of my investors, Maya Bakai, was just on a podcast where she
Mhm.
talks about creating the market. Like, the market for that did not exist. Like, if you
Yeah.
went on the street man on the street interview, asked people,
God,
"Would you like to get in a stranger's car, and
you'll
have
run.
them take you where you're going for money?" Like, "Is that interesting to you?" It's like, "No, that's
Hmm.
not interesting to me. I don't wanna stay in a stranger's house." Like, "Are you kidding?"
Yeah.
And now it's like we can't even really imagine, like, kinda life before that for a certain type of person,
Yeah.
and they're also, like, now that they're the incumbent,
Hmm.
so they created this market, and now they're almost gonna be like, they're gonna be their own victim of the market because we look at them and say,
Yeah.
"Look at
Well,
all these
because
problems you caused,"
I
right?
think I think with Airbnb, that's like especially it's easier to talk about for me than Uber in that like so many Airbnbs you go and it just sucks where it's like it's not actually somebody's house. It's not like it's like the landlord special, right? Where it's just
Mhm,
like the cheapest bed, the cheapest everything. Nobody lives here, right?
mhm.
Um but then, like and that's what I think of when I think of Airbnb. But, like, 2 weeks ago, I was in Berlin and I stayed in an Airbnb where I was like, "Oh, this person, like, actually seems like they might live here sometimes." Like, it's clearly an Airbnb, but they might live here sometimes, and it's, like, nice, and, like, we talked to them for, like, an hour when we checked in, right? So, like, I think that's the problem then, and, like, it's the same with, like, the agency thing, like, the degrading moat. Like, the something of like that true opinionated appeal remains, but then like the rest of it is so diluted. And I think that's what things just become diluted from the original interesting thing. And that's like the same thing with like talking about Brat, like the sixth person to come and ask for Brat, like, they I don't I guess it's like I don't know what they want from it in this metaphorical scenario, but it's like that's not interesting, that's not opinionated anymore. I don't know. The point is just that it's
Yeah,
all
well, I
yeah.
think one question we're gonna be asking a lot on this podcast is, like, can you scale taste?
Mm.
And do you have to scale taste in
I think
order to have a
inherently
viable business?
no. I think, like, I think actually I mean, yes and no. It's
Well,
obviously
so
a
we'll
complicated
we'll
issue.
answer at a
Yeah,
future
we'll
day.
answer this continuously.
So, can I
Uh,
ask you, like, the farm that you grew up on, at what scale were you operating? Like, was it a farm that used machinery? Was it a farm that was
yeah, no,
just your
it's small.
family's hands? Yeah.
Yeah, it's 8 acres.
Mhm,
There's like, it's I think, like, I don't know, at any given time, maybe, like, 3 to 5 people besides my parents working
mhm,
on it, but it's, like, it's small, and I think that I mean, obviously, I think that shapes how I think about, like, taste and opinions, and I think, like, that most of the best things don't scale, which is such a, like, startup, like, truism now too, like, do things that don't scale, um, but I don't know, I think it's just, like, more interesting to do things on a human scale, and there's some people who think it's way more interesting to do things on like the mass scale. And that's just not me. And like I think it's interesting to like talk to those people and like try to understand them and learn about how they think. I grew up like selling stuff at the farmers market with my parents and like handing somebody these tomatoes that we grew and
mm.
that like I knew were so good because we grew them and I saw every part of their life cycle and I eat them. Right. So it's like it's very easy to sell this tomato when it's just, like, so inherently, unquestionably good to me. Um, so I I mean, I think that's, like really I don't know, a metaphor for like how I think about taste and cultural products. Like I think it's really compelling and interesting to like find a way to do something really good on a mass market. I think like in, cinema is a good way to think of that. Like many movies can pull that off. Because too there's like so much funding, etc. But so much of the more interesting things are this more like person to person, hand to hand, these products, right?
That's so funny because when Tyler and I did the deal for Dirt to acquire Prune, which was called
Mhm.
Sitting Pretty at the time, Tyler lives up near Hudson, and I live an hour north of the city. So we met in Rhinebeck, and he brought me like a bag of tomatoes from his garden, which were like the best tomatoes ever. So we like did this handshake deal where I was like, I'll give you such and such amount of money, and we'll structure it like this, and blah blah blah. And then he gave me a bag of tomatoes. I
That's perfect.
I maybe got the better deal. I don't know.
Uh-huh. Were they like
Um,
those Loewe, heirlooms or
yes, they were. You have a picture somewhere. I'll send you. They
yeah.
were all different colors, all different shapes, and so yeah. I mean, I would say Dirt is very much a tomato business. That's how we do
Mhm.
business.
Yeah.
Um,
Bushels of tomato, not even bushels of tomatoes, bags of tomatoes.
it was a bag. Yes, it
Yeah.
was a plastic bag.
Mhm. Okay, I want to talk about these 2 reels that I was talking about earlier. These 2 Instagram creators. One who I think is so representative of, like, the slop and that I felt so ashamed of, and then the other okay, anyways, so this guy, this, like, slop guy, have you seen these things, on Instagram or TikTok where it's like I consume a lot of soccer content, so that's mainly where I see
Oh,
it,
me
but it'll be
too.
like,
Perfect.
Calafiori to Arsenal today, anyways, um, what was I gonna say? Italian
Arsenal sucks,
I know
but
you're
that's
in it.
fine.
Okay, well, your husband's a Spurs fan, right? I don't know if you are too.
Oh wow.
Uh,
Okay, so you remembered. I didn't remember.
Anyways, okay. So where am I with this? Okay, so these reels where it's like a list of numbers,
Mm,
and there'll be like a football player's like picture pops up, and it's like you're blind ranking them or something like that.
mhm.
But there's this guy who his main thing he does a few different ones, but it's like trying to get to 9,000 goals, and there's like he can do like career goals, triple goals, double goals, quadruple goals. And it's designed so that he always fails, and like I ended up on like Saturday or Sunday, like sitting on my couch watching probably like 20 minutes, half an hour of this guy's stuff. And like there's like different versions of his game, but he always fails. And he's just kind of this like woeful looking guy with these like plastic facial expressions where he's like, Neymar, you got Neymar. Like, I don't know. He's just always despairing. And he just like he's such a bummer, and I found myself watching, like, waiting for him to win because it's always like, "Oh, he gets to 8,733 goals. He fell short of 9,000." Um, and then I started watching him, and I would just skip to the end to, like, see if he wins, but he just always lost, and I blocked him because I was like, "I just wasted half an hour of my life watching this, like, falling victim to this, like, you know, slop arbitrage where he's just getting views, by, like, being this, like, abject failure time after time." Um, and so that made me mad,
Huh.
and I think that's, like, the definition of slop, but then there's this other
Do you think
guy.
there's something
Huh.
like weirdly psychologically cathartic for people of like, I need to watch this pathetic guy
Yes.
fail?
It's like slapstick, right? It's like, the clown, who, like, steps on a rake and, like, gets hit in the
Right.
face.
Right.
But then it's like which is funny, but
Clown is more hard.
yeah, yeah, definitely more hard. But, like, after half an hour, you know, or however long I spent, I don't know, maybe it was long I hope it wasn't longer, but it was
Yeah.
just like I felt bad. I felt bad having, like, wasted half an hour of my precious Saturday. Um, and it was because it was so designed to, like, be binged because he keeps losing, and I didn't even realize I was just waiting for him to win, but, like,
Mhm.
I kept watching because I wanted to see him win, and then I looked I po I watched dozens of this guy's videos, skipping to the end, but, on some of them,
Mhm.
he never won. Um,
That guy goes to the hospital and they're like, "You need to watch this reel of this guy who always loses at trying
just
to get
like
9,000." And he's like, "But doctor,
I am
that's
razzle-dazzle.
me."
Yeah. Okay, but wait, so
Dark.
the other guy I wanna talk about who at first I found myself displeased with, but then
Mm.
actually I found really compelling, um, and is a fitting metaphor for taste. Uh, his name is Tom Tries Food, and I think he's Australian. He's
That's
just
his
kind of
full legal name, Tom Tries Food.
no, it's actually Tom Lawson
It's like
Bennett.
that old, Do you remember that commercial that was like Bob had a baby, it's a boy, where he gets it in on
No,
the collect call?
I
Okay,
don't.
so it's a we have time. Okay.
Yeah.
So the commercials, like I think it was AT&T, I'm not sure. Like, you call somebody collect and they're like, it's a call from this person. Do you accept? And then they have to either pay or you pay.
Oh, yeah.
So this person says that his name is Bob had a baby, it's a boy, and then just like hangs up because that's their like there's like call from and
Yeah.
then the transmission. So anyway, I was like, Tom tries
That's
food.
but this is a commercial. Why is that, like, is
I
he,
don't know. I
like
think they were advertising their rates were lower
that
or
okay,
something. Like,
that
oh,
makes
you don't have
sense.
to call
You
collect
just
and
say
do
it.
weird
Yeah.
shit. Yeah.
Okay, I get it. Okay, anyways, this guy, Tom Tries Food, he's like this just, like, skinny guy with a mullet, nice smile, Australian,
Okay.
um, and his whole thing is he has a food phobia. So each video, he's like, "Today, I'm gonna try coffee for the first time." Um, and he must
That's
be
a
like,
really good accent.
yeah. Oh, thank you. He'll try these foods, and I'm at first I'm like, oh, that's so weird that he like doesn't like a cookie, like he's like cringing at it. But then I watched one where it's like, here's my taco recipe. Um, and his taco recipe is like he just takes a hard shell taco, breaks it in half, puts some unheated up canned beans on it, and then some ketchup, and eats
Mm-mm.
it.
No.
And exactly. And then there's a few others where he's doing like his recipes, and it's all this kind of like really sad thing. But then, like, the point is that, like, okay, that's his taste is slop. But he has like some food phobia, whatever. Uh, but then like I've started finding it so admirable that he like is trying these things where he's like trying like Malaysian food and it's too spicy for him, and he takes a bite. And he's like, oh, it's awful. But then he like I don't know. The point being this like this act of like creating your own taste and like exploring your taste and like pushing against like your preconceived notions of taste that are like so deeply entrenched where he must be in his mid to late 20s and like you know eats cold beans on a chip and calls it a taco and that's his dinner. um so I guess what I'm getting at is like it's interesting and compelling to like push your own taste and
Mhm.
like go try new things, and that's what
Yeah.
he's doing. Whereas like the other guy was just doing like attention arbitrage.
Right. I mean, taste means there's like human stakes at
Yeah.
some point. You might be really far removed from them. Like I think, if taste to you or your experience of taste is getting like a starter pack meme on like Essence's Instagram
Yeah.
page, like you're not gonna feel a lot of human stakes in
Mhm.
that. But
Because that's already
yeah,
like sublimated a few times.
exactly, sublimated.
Mhm.
But with this other guy, like there's really no layer between you and his phobia or you and his like weird habits.
Mhm.
And in a sense, he's performing them for you, but you you're feeling more of a sense of humanity from the thing that initially repelled you.
Yeah.
And I think a good critic um is directing people towards stuff that's like gonna maybe initially repel you,
Yeah.
but if you're able to
Learn the
go through
contours of it.
yeah, go through
Mhm.
some experience of it, it's gonna be ultimately more edifying whether you like it or not,
Mhm.
because taste is not as binary as I liked this or I didn't like it.
Yeah. So this guy too, he has now like 9,500 followers on Instagram. I think when I started seeing these reels, there were like 7,000. So do you think like I don't know if he keeps soon it won't be the full long number. It'll just say K at the end, right? So I'm wondering like
Mm,
though as he grows, so like the slop guy I was talking about with like the terrible soccer reels, he has like 160,000 on Instagram. And so clearly he's like leaned into it because it kept working, right? So I
mhm,
wonder with this guy, like this Tom Tries Food guy, he's so earnest and there's like a sweetness to it. Like there's one where he's trying Guinness. He's not a big drinker, so he
mm,
tries an alcohol free Guinness, which you know everyone's drinking Guinness these days. I love my Guinness. I hated it when I first tried it. Whatever. But it's like the angles like from right below him, and he's sipping it. He's like, "Oh, this is awful." But you hear his friends. He's like looking at his friends out of the off camera. He's like looking at them. They're laughing. He's like, "You like this?" But no offense to any Australians listening. But I don't know.
Full offense from me.
Oh, full offense for you.
Um,
But yeah, I
no,
just
I'm
earnesty,
kidding.
I don't know.
I earnestness is a beautiful quality. I think
Mhm.
we've had some writing in dirt recently, especially about the literary community and subcultures of book publishing,
Mm.
where people are really still trying to figure out the spectrum between earnestness and irony, especially in stuff that's like would be considered like an internet novel
Yeah.
or novels that are sort of
You're
like.
my first novels or whatever, Honor
Yeah,
Livingway.
exactly. In our Greta Rainbow's piece about Honor Levy's new book, where she's not
Mhm.
just talking about Honor Levy's book, she's talking about this kind of post alt lit
Yeah.
era.
12 years after Taipei.
Exactly. See, this is why you and I have to be on a podcast together
Mhm.
because we have the same references. Um, and you would never know from our LinkedIn photos.
No. Oh, Lord.
So yeah, shout out Taolin.
Mhm.
I hope your cats are doing well. Please stop burying cheese in your yard. Um,
Oh,
anyway,
man.
where was I going with this? Oh yeah, like the earnestness and irony spectrum, like
Yeah.
that's part of taste too, right?
Mhm.
I think some people are turned off by earnestness. My hot take is if you're turned off by earnestness, you
Hate
have
yourself.
fear. Yeah, you have fear and shame of earnestness in yourself. It's difficult to witness it in others, but probably, Francis, I don't want to psychoanalyze you, but it's possible that you have some sort of fear of failure in yourself that made the other guy
Oh,
ultimately
shit.
more repellent to you. I
Yeah.
know.
I wait,
Ooh.
so
Ooh.
this earnesty irony thing, when I was in college and, everyone's like, it's Portland, Oregon in the 2010s and
It's Portland, Jerry. Forget it.
yeah, and well, yeah, it's Southeast, anyways, people are liking things ironically, right?
Mm,
And at a certain point, I was like, "Well, does that exist? Like, can you actually like something ironically? Like, or at a certain like, maybe you can at first,
mm,
like, maybe you're listening to, I don't know, whatever, like, song that is like trendy, uh and maybe at first you're like, oh, I ironically like it, and maybe this was just me, but I like don't know if you can like something ironically in the sense that people talk about liking something ironically, or at least did, other 19-year-olds did when I was 19. Like, does that exist, or can you only like something earnestly, and if you think you like it ironically, you're just like hiding some fear from yourself?
I would say because we live in an attention economy where so many things are competing for attention, if you like something ironically, you are investing time and attention in it more so than things that you claim to like, then you have like you have a stake in it, right?
Yeah,
Like if you're making that attention investment, even if you're making that attention investment ironically, it's sort of like what people talk about with like revealed preferences. Like
yeah.
you're revealing something about yourself. It's like going on 5 dates with a guy and be like, "I really hate this guy. I'm just doing it for the story." And it's like, date 6, you're in
Yeah,
love,
what are you
right?
doing?
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I think this is probably a good place to end our first episode. If you've
Yeah.
listened to 45 minutes of this, you probably like it, or however long this episode
You love
is.
it. You're all in. We'll
Yeah,
see you next
you love
week.
it. We'll see you next week on Wednesday. Thanks.